Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace, so if you're looking for a new website, then go to squarespace.com.
So this beautiful leafy specimen here, I really love it, but it's just horrible stuff to bushwhack through. It's called Devil's Club, and I don't know if you can see in the camera there, but there's barbs or spines all the way up the stems, and once you get them in your fingers, they're really hard to get out, and even the bottom of the leaves have all these barbs in them. When they're spread out like this, it's not a problem, but when there's a forest of them, it's just horrible to go through. You can see they're really sharp and quite stiff, so yeah, something to avoid, but really beautiful to photograph because they're usually under the canopy of trees, especially old growth trees. The pack's getting really heavy. Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Another little adventure today. This is a bit of a day trip. I guess I've driven about an hour from where I live, and after doing a bit of a search on the interweb there, I found some kind of obscure pictures of a little waterfall not far actually from the side of the highway, and lucky for me the photos had some coordinates, so I've hiked in from the highway. The highway I can actually see the bridge from here, but it is a little bit of a bushwhack to get in here. Now then, photographing this might be tricky because, as you might be able to see, there's a canyon and the waterfall is kind of at the end of the canyon. I had a quick look and there aren't that many places to stand, so I might have a little bit of a hard time recording this one. I will try though. It's pretty deep in the water there, but I actually don't mind if I get my feet wet on this one because, like I said, the car is not that far. It's just a bit of a bushwhack to get in here, and actually I should have hiked on this side of the creek because it looks much easier than the side I was on, and it's very slippery as usual getting across the creek. Well, as you can see, this is pretty impressive. It has beautiful mossy rocks again, just like last week. But you can see it's a little bit of a problem to get into. This section here is very deep. It'll probably come up to about here on me. Right in front of the camera, it's definitely going to come up to my thighs. So I might have to get my feet wet a little bit. I should have brought my hip waders. I guess I could go back, but I don't really feel like bushwhacking back to the car. But I think the best spot is probably right in front of the camera there, looking down the canyon. There's a really great little waterfall in the foreground, and then there's some nice boulders that are stuck in the middle there. Actually, I'm really surprised at how much water is coming down right now, probably from the snow melt from the mountains. But yeah, this is a really nice scene. The rocks are extremely slippery, so I've got to be a little bit careful because I'm just here on my own, and I mean, I do get cell phone reception, but I don't really feel like breaking a leg today. I think I'm going to try right just in front of the camera to start with, and then we'll go from there. It looks like it might be better on the other side of the creek. Yeah, this is going to be a little tricky. Oh, the things we do for Queen and country. Actually, the water is quite nice. It's really quite refreshing. It's not as cold as I thought it was going to be. So the reason why I wanted to get in the middle of the stream here is that as soon as I go over too far to the right, then some of the cliff blocks out some of that waterfall. And even though it doesn't look that bad when you're looking at it, I know from experience that as soon as I get those images back, I'll start looking at them, I'll probably think to myself, oh, I wish I'd got into the middle of the creek to include the whole waterfall, if that makes sense. This is a really, really great looking waterfall. Now, I put on a 32 to 64 zoom so I can play around with the composition just a little bit. What I have in mind is just doing some straight on shots. I'll do some verticals where I close in quite close to the waterfall, maybe have some foliage or trees at the top. And then I think I'll also do some horizontals. I'm not too sure about this log over to the left here, but we'll see how we can interplay that with the composition. I'm also using a polarizer. Again, I'll probably use it sparingly, maybe half polarization, just so we can keep some of that glare, but also really intensify those greens. Something else that I'll have to do, if you watched last week's video, and if you haven't watched it, I'll leave a link up in the corner here, is I'll probably have to do multiple exposures. And the reason being is that a lot of the foliage is getting moved around quite a bit by wind and of course the waterfall itself. And I'd really like that to be quite sharp. So I'll take some images at a higher ISO just for the foliage so we get a nice fast shutter speed. And as far as the waterfall goes with shutter speed, I haven't really taken any images yet, but I'm guessing probably around 1/4 of a second to a second, and perhaps combine some of those as well. We'll see how it goes.
Once again, I'd like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you're looking for a beautiful, professional looking website, then why not head over to squarespace.com. For example, if you're setting up a gallery of images, all you have to do is drag and drop your selection over to the page. Once you've dragged your images over, it's very easy to caption, sort, and even edit those images. Interested? Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and if you like what you find, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase.
Alright, it's a little precarious here, but I'm going to try and go over the whole process of what I'm thinking when I'm taking images, where I focus, and the shutter speed and aperture and so on. So my base exposure, I've decided to use the lowest ISO that I can, in this case ISO 100. F16, I use F16 all the time. It's not the optimum sharpness for this lens, but F16 is fine. I just want to get lots of depth from the foreground to the background. Now the shutter speed is a little bit slow, but we'll deal with that in a minute. And I'm talking about the waterfall here. It might look a little bit mushy. As far as exposure compensation, I brought it down to -1 because the waterfall is very bright. So let's just focus on the foreground rock here. I don't know if you can see that right here. And we'll just take a shot there. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. So the exposure looks good. We can check the histogram if we want to. It's a little bit underexposed, but you'll also notice that the waterfall is a little bit overexposed. So we're going to have to deal with that. I'd rather have slight underexposure than overexposure, to be honest with you. Now as far as depth goes, let's have a look. So the waterfall, the rocks in the background are nice and sharp. The foreground is sharp, and the very foreground. So F16 works fine. So let's deal with the exposure on the waterfall. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the, I'm going to focus on the waterfall, and I'm going to bring the exposure down to 1/5 of a second. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing I can do is I don't need to be at F16. I can just go down to, let's go to F8. And now it's at 1/2 a second. And we'll just bring the ISO up until it's at the appropriate shutter speed. So at ISO 250, F8 at 1/5 of a second, -1 compensation. Let's try that. So we have a look at the image, and you can see now that we have detail in the waterfall. The only problem is that up here you can see that it's a little washed out, so it's slightly overexposed still. So what we can do there is let's bring the exposure compensation down to -2 stops. And you'll see now that it's at 1/10 of a second, F8, ISO 250. We can bring the ISO down to 100. And that brings it down to 1/4 of a second or 1/5 of a second. So let's try that. And we'll just have a look at that exposure now. Now you'll notice that around the waterfall it's quite underexposed, but we're not concerned about that really. We're just concentrating on this little section up here. And we can look at the histogram again. And you see that the whites are well over to the left, so that should work fine. And lastly, I want to concentrate on the foliage. The foliage, the ferns here are moving around quite a bit, so let's try a 1/20th of a second. So how do we do that? Let's leave the ISO at 8, and we'll focus on the ferns that are moving around, and we need to bring the shutter up, so we'll just adjust the ISO. We'll bring it up to about a 1/20th of a second, so that's ISO 500. Now it's at -2. We don't want it at -2, we want it at about 0 or -1. So let's just bring it up to -1. So we need to up the ISO again. So we're at ISO 1000. We'll take that shot. We'll just have a look at this. And what we'll do is we'll just zoom in on those ferns just to make sure that they're reasonably sharp. And they don't look too bad. Actually, we could probably use an even faster shutter speed. So what we'll do is we'll just bring the ISO up a bit more. F1600, ISO 1600, sorry. And we'll just zoom in again. And as you can see, the ferns look quite sharp. All right, so what I'll do with those images afterwards is I'll just paint in the bits that need to be sharp with the ferns. The waterfall I'll paint in for the shutter speed that I want, and then the rest of it I'll just leave at the lower ISO, if that makes sense. There's something that smells really nice around here, some kind of wildflower, and at first I thought it was these lilies here. These are really pretty. This one I think is almost finished. Usually the petals are kind of spread out like this. I think they're called a tiger lily. And there's also columbine, but columbine don't smell either, so I'm not quite sure what it is, but smells really good. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this little adventure on the side of the highway. It's kind of neat that we can drive down the center of Vancouver Island, pretty much stop anywhere we want, jump out of the car and find nice little spots like this, so I'm extremely lucky. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up, it really helps. And until next week, bye for now.